So we were anticipating Joe and Rihanna being here with us today, and I said, that's not a problem, I'll do a really short talk so we can have as much of them and as little as me. And then I realised the theme was silence. So I might just not say anything, that was my other plan. But kind of silence in 10 minutes is tricky. Because I think we all, I'm sure, have experienced these periods of silence, and they can feel really significant and throw up so many questions. These times where we might feel that God isn't hearing our prayers or understanding our needs, or maybe even we feel that God is ignoring us. And there's a great biblical example of this that we find in John chapter 11, which is the story of Lazarus being raised to life. So we're going to read a paraphrased version of that familiar story now. Now, a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. Then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." We skip a couple of verses and we hear, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up." I love the disciples. So the disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, it'll get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but the disciples thought that he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him." And down to verse 17. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had been dead already in the tomb for 4 days. When Martha heard Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Down to verse 32. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how much he loved him." And then we come down to verse 41, and it says that they took the stone away. Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." I just want to very briefly consider 5 responses that we have when we feel that God is silent. I know it's completely tempting and totally understandable to focus on those responses and the situations that we find ourselves in. However, what I want to just encourage us to do today is remember God's response to us when we find ourselves in the place with those questions. So we'll think of how we feel and we think of God's response. Often when we are experiencing silence, I think that we can feel isolated and alone. God's response to us in that place is clear. He says, "You are not alone, I am with you." This promise is found multiple times all through the Bible. God reminded people of that promise regularly. And I think that is something that we need to be reminded about too. Jesus himself said that he is always with us to the very end of the age. So when we feel alone, we need to hold on to the promise that we are not alone. That is not true. Even in times of silence, God is with us. And in addition to that, we can be with each other too. In times of silence, we can often feel confused. God, what on earth is going on? I guess that was Mary and Martha's feeling. They knew that Jesus was the answer, and they said as much. If you had been here, Lord, things would have been different. We have this mystery in following God and being in a relationship with Him. We certainly don't have all the answers, but we need to remember and stand firm in the truth that He does. His response when we are feeling confused is that He is in control. He knows what He's doing, that we should trust Him because He's got this. Proverbs 3 verse 5 is a great promise to call to mind. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In the mystery and confusion sometimes of following God, and sometimes when we feel He's silent, we need to hear His voice. Trust me, I've got this. We often feel that the timing of things is not right. And when I say not right, it's the timing of things how we want it to be. We ask God when we think we need things, but the answer doesn't always come when we expect it to. Mary and Martha experienced that in a very real way, and the disciples obviously didn't get it either. Why would Jesus wait 2 more days? It's a really good question, isn't it? God's response is that He sees the bigger picture. Just like Jesus did. He knew waiting 2 days before He went to Lazarus would bring glory to God. He could have been there earlier. He could have healed Lazarus. But the bigger picture was to signify that God can conquer death. We read in the Bible that for God, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. We also read there is a time and a season for everything. So let's trust God's timing, even in those times of silence. The next one is a big one for me. If I feel like God isn't hearing or answering me, then I will crack on and I will give it a go and sort it out myself. But God's response in that situation is clear. You need to rely on me. God says, I know better than you do. Don't get too big for your boots or get ahead of yourself. Stay humble. Trust me. Don't try and sort things out for yourself. Finally, this is a big one, I think, for lots of us. We can feel that it's not fair. And perhaps often it isn't fair. But in this story and in many others, we hear God's response when He says, I feel your pain. Jesus felt the pain of Mary and Martha. We read that He wept. Even though He knew the bigger picture, He knew what was going to happen, He still felt the pain. And God feels our pain too. Even if we feel He's silent, God feels our pain. So often our response to silence is, I feel alone, I'm confused, I'm frustrated, it's not fair. I'm going to give it a go at sorting it out myself. My encouragement is that God's response is bigger, and His response is more full of truth than that. He says, you're not alone. Trust me. Rely on me. I see the bigger picture, and I do feel your pain. Finally, I see a challenge and an opportunity for us in times of silence. The challenge is that when we feel that God is silent, we often respond in the same way. We close up, we stop praying, we stop communicating and talking to God. We might even block him out and try and ignore him. Let's encourage one another that even in those times, we need to continue to be open to God, to trust him and bring it all to him. The good, the bad, the frustration, the anger, the confusion, whatever it is, we mustn't stop bringing it to him. And finally, an opportunity in times of quiet that silence gives us is to draw close. When it's quiet, we need to be closer to hear that still small voice. So we're going to do that now in a time of prayer and worship. I'm really aware when we're talking about a topic like this, also in such a short space of time, we are evoking and provoking some big feelings. Some of those that I've mentioned, but also some of those things that you might be journeying through yourself. Where are you, God? And all I can do, as I said, I don't want to be glib about it, but trying to draw us back instead of staying in that place, coming back to who God is, and that he hears our prayers and he wants to answer us. So as we come into a time of worship now, if nothing else, let's once again draw close to him and say to him, God, even in these quiet times, please would you speak to me, reveal yourself, let me hear your still small voice.